Hello, our friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family.
And here we are again.
Here we are again, and Cindy's bundled up. Looks like she's going out in the snow. She's got her snow hat on. She's got her bandana on.
Yeah.
Of course, the way things are. In some places, you're supposed to keep wearing that in the house and maybe in bed even. Maybe when you're taking a shower, you're allowed to take it off.
There have been times when you're giggling at me when we were going to bed and you're like, are you going to leave your bandana on? Because I just forgot to take it off.
Well, we didn't forget that we are making a whole series on Vedic astrology.
Yes. So here we go with our first house.
Yes. And, there's a lot to take into consideration. I mean, Vedic astrology is so in-depth, it's mind-blowing.
Oh my gosh, it's like being a brain surgeon. There's so many different layers to take into account with Vedic. It's not just, the sun sign. No, there's so much more. You can do so much with Vedic astrology. It takes a while to learn.
Yeah, again, so just to recap, Vedic astrology is different than Western astrology. Primarily, well, there's more than one reason, but
Well, yeah, the number one thing why I feel it is different is because it takes into account the tilt of the Earth, which is 23 degrees. Western astrology starts their calculations at 0 degrees. And when you're studying the science of light and how it hits the human body and how it makes things react, to me, those 23 degrees are very important. Also, in Western astrology, they take the sun sign, and that's kind of like what everything is all about is your sun sign, whereas in Vedic astrology, they use the moon sign because the sun is your soul, but the moon is your mind. That's your emotions, and how do we calculate that with your personality?
and also the ascendant. The ascendant is very important, and we were talking about how some people, like one of the ones, what's his name again? The gentleman.
KRS.
KRS, right.
I forgot his name, but
KRS. I mean, if you do KRS Vedic astrology, you'll find millions of views and millions of videos probably too. But he basically says the ascendant is like a 7 out of 10 as far as importance in Vedic, whereas the sun is like a 3 out of 10. And of course, it's inverse, at least inverse in the Western system.
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, the moon is when you're looking at your moods and your emotions. I mean, that's usually how you can put together someone's personality and help them understand themselves.
Exactly. So when we look at this chart, you can see the position of the first house. And also, just the way that the charts are laid out are very, very different. Like the wheel system of Western is so different than this. So this is the first house right here. And then you see how they progress out. The second house, third, it goes counterclockwise. Fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th, and 11th, and 12th. So starting with the first house, what would you want to share about the first house?
Well, your first house, basically, it involves the head. It involves your whole life. The first house and whatever is sitting in there that's going to be the blanket of your whole life, your whole personality.
And you said the head because also, it's interesting when you look at the history of astrology. And we're so familiar right now with like the 12 houses, but also the 12 signs of the zodiac in being these beings, Aquarius is the water bearer. Right, and you have Cancer as a crab, and Scorpio is a scorpion, and of course, Taurus is the bull, Gemini is the twins, etc., etc., etc. Which that actually comes out of the Greek system, that whole line of thinking.
Right, it does. So, yeah.
And the original Vedic way of thinking it was more in line with the body, as if each house is representing a different part of the body.
Right. That is making it more of a personified example.
And so when we look at this, what we are looking at, some in the Vedic line of thinking might think that we are actually looking at the body of the preserver of the universe, of Vishnu, in a sense. And I've touched on this before, where if we really are starting to get into the Vedic line of thinking, and the thinking of the people of the Indus Valley, we could take, again, Shiva, which is thought to be masculine, but is really the divine kind of, not really hermaphrodite. He's both. It's both. It's because Shiva is that which is not yet in material existence. It's consciousness itself. It can also represent kind of the void in so many ways. And then through Shakti, through the divine feminine component, we end up with Vishnu, in a sense, that preserving force, which Shiva is actually quoted as saying, when you worship Vishnu, you worship me, and vice versa, because we're one. Because you could view it as Shiva being that which is on the outside of the veil, representing the void, representing just pure consciousness itself that doesn't have any sort of manifest form. Through the divine feminine, that takes form as Vishnu. There we could also equate it to the Western system, sort of God the Father, the Holy Spirit, which we could equate to Shakti, if you guys understand the Kabbalah and some of the older Hebrew traditions and line of thinking, the divine feminine in the aspect of Shakti, giving us the sun, which we're all very, very familiar with, the S-O-N of God, which also in some ways has been represented by the S-U-N of God. There's so many different ways of looking at it. So when we're looking at this chart, there is a line of thinking in the Vedic tradition that we're actually looking at the body of Vishnu, or you might want to call it the body of Christ in a sense as well. And because it's the manifest. It's the spirit, the thought, the consciousness manifesting through the divine feminine, giving us that interplay of the yin and the yang, and bringing about the manifest universe, which is divided into 12, which again is very interesting because we have 12 disciples, we have the 12 tribes of Israel, we have the 12 houses of the zodiac. All coincidence? I don't think so.
I know it does get very deep. It can get very complicated, but if you put this in a personified way, then you can start to get a grasp on it.
And again, this is the programming of the matrix that we live in, this fractal holographic universe. This is how the programming works. Everything is interrelated and interconnected. So ultimately all is one, but it's just different ways of expressing different aspects of the one, just as each individual consciousness that's embodied on this planet is a unique expression of the consciousness of the one source.
It's true, and another thing I forgot to mention about the differences between Vedic and Western is, if you follow Vedic back, you can follow that back, I think, about 8,000 years. Granted, there's a lot of piecemealing you need to do, but with Western astrology, it's strange because it, back about 2,000 years, and then it just sort of stops.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we could follow it back to the times of Alexander. So, Alexander the Great, like maybe 300 BC, which is not very old compared to what we have with a lot of other traditions as well. So now we were talking about the Ascendant, and the first house is the Ascendant, correct?
That's right. That's your first house, and, that's going to be whatever is sitting there, whichever zodiac sign, whichever planet, you're going to be able to put that flavor on the first house, which is the head, and it is your life in general, and you can put that flavor of whatever planet or zodiac sign is there, and you layer that on, and that's the kind of personality you're going to have.
Yeah, so that's very important because that's understanding. Again, these are ways to understand self, and there's so many different components to it. Say for instance, do you want to take one for example? Let's take you, a Libra. You're a Libra ascendant. So give us some generalities.
Well, in general, my job is to work with other people to find relationships and find the balance in myself, which is very difficult. And you would think that Libra, it has the balancing scales, that they would come balanced, but I'm probably the most imbalanced person I know on the planet. And so I'm supposed to find the balance through other people.
Yeah, that's interesting. Seeing yourself in others and recognizing that.
Always, yeah.
Yeah. So that's very, very interesting. And This is just one aspect. Now, what happens? Now, I know there could be more than one planet in a house. So, I mean, for instance, if I could give you a for instance, like what happens if you have, say, Venus in the first house with Libra? I mean, what type of. See, because each planet has its own personality, and each sign has its own personality. So, if you did also have Venus in the first house, what would that look like?
Well, if you have Venus in the first house, Venus is about art, Venus is about comfort, Venus is about design. Venus likes the material things. And if you want to mix that with a Libra who is looking for balance in, everybody that they come across, you're going to find someone who might be actually maybe a designer of sorts, or someone who might be a painter using other people as models, something like this.
Because when we talk about the conjunctions, and then okay, one other thing we should talk about too is degrees, because that is very important as well. If we could just touch on degrees.
Yeah, the degrees on a planet, depending on high, low, there's 30 degrees in each house, and with Vedic astrology, it breaks it down. So normally, the lower the degree, the stronger that planetary influence is on that house.
Okay, so if it was something that was, say, 5 degrees in, the influence wouldn't be as intense as if it was, say, 20 degrees.
Well, it is also measured by, like, 5 degrees would be like in its infant stages. So if you could imagine an infant Venus with a personality of an infant, that's how you would correlate that into the first house. So there's a lot of information you need to take into account when you look at the planets and the houses they sit and what kind of influence they have.
So that gets us, like we're talking about something called rashas as well. And so rashas are these divisions of 30 degrees, and there's 12 of them. So, again, we have 360 degrees in a circle. So this is kind of how this works. And Rasha is different than Rishi. Rishis are the seers that give us the Vedic writings and teachings. We could view them as ascended masters. But Rashas are basically segments of 30 degrees, of which, again, there's 12. And that's why we have 12 houses to make up 360 degrees and the circle, so to speak, of the cosmos.
Mm-hmm. Right. And the way it was explained to me is like the Rasha has the 30 degrees, and it's kind of like digging in a pile of leaves, for example. And as you're digging in that pile of leaves, you might find, what would be maybe an old bone. And you dig a little bit further and you might find, a little more, some different kind of rocks, but you get deeper and deeper and deeper, and you find out more information the deeper you dig.
Very interesting. So there's a lot to this. And then when we talk about conjuncts, so like say if you had something like we have going on right now with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, and they're both sitting in a house, it could create, depending on the conjunction, either a very, very benevolent situation or it could create a malevolent one.
Right. And in this situation, again, you look at the degrees and see whichever planet is holding the lower degrees, that planetary aspect is going to kind of overtake the whole situation as you see it.
And again, the ascendant is the sign that's rising on the eastern horizon at the time of birth at a particular place on Earth. Wherever your soul is fully integrated with that body, and you're coming out to face this incarnation in the world.
It's a snapshot. It's, God took a picture of your life map or your star map when you were born in the sky, and that's something that we can use to help us throughout our life.
So again, the first house in Vedic astrology is considered the most important because it marks the beginning of life. It's the first house formed in terms of sunrise, thus refers to the new beginnings and the early environment one gets in life.
Right. And, there's a lot of information there. So the first house is a pretty heavy hitter.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Well, I hope you guys found this informative. We will be digging into the other houses as well, and we'll go into the planets, and we'll go into deeper understanding of conjunctions and things like that as well.
Yes, we will. So we hope you enjoyed.
Guys, as always, thank you for your support on Ko-Fi and Patreon. Make sure you subscribe with the bell clicked on both channels. God bless and namaste.
Namaste.